All right, Matt is joining us now. Griffith. Could I just ask now for everybody who doesn't need to speak, so not Sarah and not Paul, just to mute yourselves now, just while the talk's going on, and then we won't have extraneous noises. That'd be grand.
Great. So just want to say hi to Matt if he's there.
He should be there. Yes, I can see him. There he is.
Fab. Okay, so without further ado, just to introduce you to Paul Hetherington, who has been the Director of Fundraising and Communications at Buglife for the past 10 years. He's a lifelong organic gardener and allotment holder, a series consultant for CBeebies Teeny Tiny Creatures, and author and consultant on a number of children's books based on invertebrates. This evening, he's going to tell us why bugs matter and how we can all help to prevent their extinction. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you everyone for inviting me along. I'm going to share screen now, so just bear with us a few seconds while we do that. It's telling me I want to install a new version of Zoom now. It would do it now, and I can ignore that. From the beginning. Right. Can you see the slideshow rather than the... Yes? Brilliant. So I'm going to talk about why bugs matter, the threats they're facing, and how we can all play our role in preventing their extinction. But I'm going to start off by just telling you a little bit about Buglife itself. Now, Buglife was originally registered as an organisation as the Invertebrate Conservation Trust back in the year 2000, but it literally got going really in 2002 when we took on our first staff member and became a fully registered charity, and also changed the name to Buglife, the Invertebrate Conservation Trust. So we are 20 now, which is kind of quite exciting, I guess. And we've done quite a lot of things over the years as an organisation, and I've just picked a few just to sort of give you a bit of flavour. So we do a lot of practical conservation work, predominantly in the UK, and we've got people based all over the UK. But we have also done some work overseas, and I think you can see my pointer here. This really intricate little creature here is one of my favourite overseas creatures that we've ever done some work with, and that's on the island of St Helena in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And St Helena is, I suppose, the Galapagos of the Atlantic, if you like. It's a volcanic island, middle of nowhere, and you have got over 500 endemic species, i.e. species that are found nowhere else in the world. You've got things like the blushing spider. You've also got things like the cabbage tree. But as I say, this is my favourite one. It's the spiny yellow woodlouse. So it's a woodlouse, and you can probably tell that from looking at it, and it's spiny and it's bright yellow in colour. I just think it's such a fabulous little creature that's, developed on that island. And the other great thing about doing things like that is, while we were on the island doing our work with the bugs there, we rediscovered a local groundhopper, similar to our froghoppers, that had been thought to be extinct for over 100 years. So you can find these things that people think are extinct again. St Helena is probably most famous fact. It was where Napoleon was exiled to, but also from an invertebrate perspective, it's the place where you found those giant earwigs. And if you've been to any of the museums and they've got those old specimens, you'll see bits of those giant earwigs there. Sadly, one hasn't been seen since 1967, but as I said, we rediscovered something that hadn't been seen for well over 100 years. So you never know, they might be hanging on somewhere. So that's a bit of our overseas work. In the UK, we've done a lot of work on individual species, and this is one of these iconic species here. This is the ladybird spider. So we're picking things that are fairly obvious from how they look. This is a male ladybird spider. Only the males take on this brilliant red sort of appearance. They live about 7 years, and for all but about 2 months of it, they are basically black, and you can just see the little dots on them. And then when they're ready to mate, they develop this bright red color. When we started work, which was just over 10 years ago on the ladybird spider, it had once been sort of not common, but available and findable anywhere really from the New Forest round to Land's End. When we started work on it, it was literally on one site only in the Dorset heathlands, and that area that it covered was little larger than a tennis court. So at real risk of UK extinction. There are very similar spiders you'll find in the Mediterranean, Turkey and so forth, but they are slightly different leg markings, slightly different colorings. Anyway, so we started work on this spider, and we did some captive breeding of them. We did some translocation after preparing new sites for it. It's now found on 19 sites across that area, which means we feel we now have got a sustainable population of it. And that was really sort of brought home last year. There was a big fire in that area down at Wareham. You may even have heard about it. Well, that fire engulfed the majority of the original site that those spiders came from. So if that work hadn't happened, we could now have an extinct species in the UK if it hadn't been for the work that went on there. So that's sort of individual species work. We do a lot of work in collaboration with other organisations, hence this Back from the Brink. They were 7 species focused organisations ranging from RSPB, really large, down to people like ourselves, and amphibian and reptile conservation, who are relatively small, who were working on this project along with Natural England, and the ladybird spider was one of the species in that, and that's when we got those final sites done to get it to sort of a sustainable population. And that project worked with almost 200 species at risk of extinction, trying to move them up the curve of sort of recovery rate. So we also worked on things like the narrow-headed ant, the shrill carder-bee, and then a whole host of invertebrates that live in decaying wood in ancient woodlands and so forth. Things like the violet click beetle, which is only found at the moment on 17 trees in the whole country. So very, very rare, particularly when you consider that 15 of the 17 trees are in Windsor Great Park. So some very, very rare species. So that's some of the species conservation work. We have maybe 40,000 terrestrial invertebrates in the UK. So we can't, unfortunately, look after all of them all the time, so we do have to prioritise. So we prioritise species at risk of extinction, hence ladybird spider. We've done work on tansy beetle, narrow-headed ant, a whole raft of these species at risk of extinction. We also have been focusing on pollinators. I'm going to talk a lot more about the pollinator work later. We also have a focus on fresh water. In the past, we've done a lot of work with the white-clawed crayfish, our native crayfish. That's another species under extreme threat, mainly from non-native invasive species. White-clawed crayfish is relatively small as crayfish go, so it's not very big on the dinner plate. So what was done was they imported the signal crayfish from the United States to breed in this country for the dinner plate. This was something that was done previously in Scandinavia, and exactly the same thing happened there. They escaped into the wild. Now, the problem is, yeah, and they're larger, so they are more competitive for food, but they carry a thing called crayfish plague, and they carry it. It doesn't affect the signal crayfish, but within about a year of a signal crayfish getting into a water system that has got the white clawed in, they've all fallen victim to the plague and died. So it's a very, very serious threat. And a lot of the work we've done with them is basically been creating ark sites, places where they are safe. This is often looking at old flooded quarries where there's no waterway into them, so they are relatively safe. They can never be 100% safe, because there have been instances where a bird has picked up a signal crayfish and dropped it into one of these ark sites, and that's written that off. And there was also, unfortunately, an incident where someone from a conservation organisation was given a crayfish and popped it into an ark site and wrote them all off. But unfortunately, these things happen. We fight to save important sites for invertebrates, and this rather sort of almost moonscape here. You might notice this bridge in the background, which is probably quite recognisable. That's the Thames crossing, and this is actually West Thurrock Marshes. It's mainly ash that's come from one of the power stations that used to be in the area. But it's one of only 2 places in the country you will find the distinguished jumping spider. It is also a fantastic site for tiger beetles, which I think are some of the most exciting beetles that you get. They scurry around hunting things down. It was all set to be built on. There was going to be a big Royal Mail sorting depot built there and things like that. And we fought a long campaign, and in the end, there's probably around about 20 acres that have been saved and are now a nature reserve. Unfortunately, it's not really a very visible nature reserve because it's in the middle of an industrial estate and there's no parking and no sort of public access to it. We also manage a site called Canby Wick, which is a little bit further down the Thames estuary, which is, again, a very important site for invertebrates. Things like the shrill carnaby are probably rarest bumblebee there. And of course, on the other side of the Thames from this is a place called Swanscombe Marshes, which we're at the moment fighting a campaign to try and save it being turned into a theme park. That we've just had that designated as a site of special scientific interest, which should give it some protection, but unfortunately it's been put through a special planning procedure that was put there for road building and port building and airport building called an NSIP. And for some reason, the theme park is now suddenly qualified to go in under that, which means there's no local accountability. It just goes up for a governmental decision. But as I say, we've managed to get it designated as a SSSI. We've put pressure on 2 of the people who were going to be involved, well, organisations to be involved with it, BBC and ITV, and they've both pulled out and removed any use of their intellectual property in relation to it. So hopefully we will be able to win this planning battle, but it's a hard fight. And we also do a lot of other sort of campaigning. So this horrible looking chemical here is cypermethrin. Cypermethrin is a type of sheep dip, or was. We had a long campaign to get it banned. And we did a lot of research around research that had already been done and managed to prove that 1 drop of it getting into a water system would wipe out all the invertebrates for at least 10 kilometers downstream from where it got in there. And I'm pleased to say that it's now got not just a UK, but a global ban on it as a chemical for use in sheep dip. It is still used in 1 or 2 products, but it's no longer used for things like sheep dip, which is a big plus. So that's sort of some of the stuff we've done in 20 years of existence. We've also fought on neonicotinoid insecticides and a lot of other things which I'm going to come on to in a bit more detail. So why are invertebrates important? Well, they sit generally fairly near the bottom of the food chain. They're very, very important for most things, and they make up over 70% of the known species on our planet. And possibly that's because it's a bit of an artificial divide. Humans have backbones, so we decided to divide the world between things that have backbones and things that don't have backbones. So invertebrates range from jellyfish and shellfish to lobsters and crabs and all of the insects and the spiders. So it's a massive, massive area when you think about it for the number of species there. It's thought there may well be even more than the 10 million species, because invertebrates are something that people are always finding new species of. And once DNA analysis comes through of things, they are finding that 2 things that look almost the same are DNA very, very different. So they are actually separate species. Plants are dependent on them, and fungi. And you can look here, so, vertebrates, around 0.4% of the known species on the planet. And yet we are responsible for the loss and the destruction of so many of our invertebrates. And they're so important. As I say, they sit near the bottom of the food chain, but they have such important roles. They have a role in the soil production, in breaking down of organic matter, be it things like millipedes and woodlice, or moving on up, things like dung beetles. I mean, where would the world be without dung beetles breaking down all of the dung that gets dropped everywhere outside, or carrion beetles, or even blowflies, to be honest, that all have an important role in recycling and getting rid of things that we would hate to have all piled up outside. They break down dead old plant matter and turn it back into nutrients in the soil. They're a food source. the most consumed item on this planet in terms of a meat type of source, if you like, is scampi. There is more scampi than any other meat source, and scampi comes from an invertebrate. They play a role in filtering and purifying water. Many of the shellfish have a very important role in doing that kind of activity. They are also good predators of things that we have find as an issue, including things like the wasp. You know, most people hate the common wasp, but it plays a really important role if you're a gardener in, you know, getting rid of the things that eat your plants. And it's only come August that they become a problem. And I'm very happy to talk at more length about wasps later on if people want to ask any questions about them, and I'll tell you why they are wonderful creatures. So very good at pest and weed control. They are food for other animals. If we had no invertebrates, we would probably be reduced to about 2 species of bird. The crossbill, which eats grass seeds, and you would probably have one of the carrion raptor type birds left, because rabbits could still exist because they live on grass and there's plenty of roadkill for them. So, but yeah, we'd be down to about 2 bird species in this country if we didn't have invertebrates. And then of course pollination, and we're going to talk about pollination in a lot more detail, so I won't go into a lot of information on it here. So that's what they do for us, but the problem is they are in decline. And here is just a little graph showing some of the declines. And yeah, most of our focus as people and what we're aware of is over here, these land mammals, and we think of elephants and rhinos and tigers. And yes, they are in decline, but you know, if you look at the sort of endangered and the threatened, it's only 15% of the species that are really at risk. 19% of reptiles, 22% of all vertebrates. Amphibians up at 23%. You're getting a talk from Froglife soon. Birds 26%, but that's including the in decline. Now let's jump over here and look at insects. All insects, 41%. And then some of these caddisflies, mayflies, stoneflies, dragonflies, they're all ones that require fresh water as part of their reproductive system. And an interesting fact about mayflies, the slightest change in temperature in the water, which is happening a lot due to climate change, is causing real problems for them. And one of my good colleagues monitors mayflies, and he has observed over the last 10 years where he monitors mayflies, where you find them has moved a mile upstream, and that's just down to minute increase in the temperature of the water. But the net result of that is that in perhaps 20 years time, at this rate, we will only get some of these species found in the sort of highest areas of the Highlands of Scotland. Everywhere else, at the lower altitude, the water's going to be too warm for them. So we're going to lose all these species from large areas if we're not careful in what happens. So very, very susceptible to climate change. Now you see, here we are, flies. Flies are doing quite well. And what we do find with invertebrates is the more generalist ones seem to be okay. They do all right. But it's ones that are much more specialist that are in trouble. You can see butterflies not doing particularly well. Beetles, another very important species to us. Bees. Yeah, so a lot of these really important species are in quite major decline. So I now want to talk about important invertebrate areas. Now, we'll talk about why declines are happening shortly. So important invertebrate areas are, we've been basically looking at the data for where there are really important species around the country. You can see this map on our website, and you can zoom into it if you want to and have a look to see what's in your area. Now this is the large scale one, and these squares are 10 hectare squares. But you can see there are an awful lot of places that are important for invertebrates, and an awful lot of them around in this part of the world, and in southern areas. Big void in the Midlands, and a big void in this sort of north of England going into Scotland. Now, how much of that is down to a lack of recording and how much of it is down to a real dearth, we're not sure about, but it is very, very worrying. And the reason we've been mapping these important invertebrate areas is it will help direct where we really need to look at tackling planning legislation to prevent these really key sites being destroyed. And it's not the 10 hectare we're looking at here. We do the fine scale mapping, which takes it down to a field scale. But it also, we can find out what is needed. So the Brecks, which I think is about here, the Breckland area. Now, that's got a wonderfully named beetle, the wormwood moonshiner, that is an endemic species there. And the wormwood moonshiner is dependent on the plant, wormwood, surprise, surprise. Wormwood is also in serious decline. But we have found that if you can reintroduce wormwood, the beetle populations pick up, and they will be found to the extent where we found a roundabout on the, I think it's the A47 runs through the Brecks, but it might be the A46, that had a load of wormwood on it, and it's covered in the beetles. So this is the thing for invertebrates. You can make a real difference in a very, very small space if you put the right plants, the right habitat in place for them. So that's important in invertebrate areas. And I want to talk about pollinators and use them really as an example to understand about declines. But first we need to think, what are pollinators? So everybody thinks about bees. This is actually a solitary bee. It's a red mason bee. Solitary bees are probably our most important pollinators. A lot of people worry about honeybee populations, but the reality is honeybees are effectively a farmed animal. Their populations go up and down very much on how many people are keeping bees. And one of the problems that has happened is if too many people start keeping bees in an area, you get a lot of bee death because there isn't enough food to go around. And that's one of the key issues, is having enough food. But this is a solitary bee, particularly good for pollinating fruit. Solitary bees are. Now, harder to see on this side here, this here is a bumblebee. Bumblebees are very important as well. And of course, they carry out buzz pollination, which is what we need for things like tomatoes and aubergines. Without bumblebees, you won't get buzz pollination. Honeybees cannot carry out buzz pollination. But it goes beyond bees, pollinators. Up here, you can see a hoverfly. Hoverflies are very important pollinators. Hoverflies are also brilliant because the larvae of the majority of them actually feed on aphids. So, gardeners should really love them. They pollinate, they eat aphids. What more do you want as a gardener? Butterflies. We've actually only got about 60 species of butterflies in this country. Bees wise, we've got about 25 species of bumblebee, almost 250 solitary bee species. And then when you move on to hoverflies, you're looking at almost 1,000 species of hoverfly. Moths. Moths play a very important role in pollination. Here we've got a day flying one. It's the 6-spot burnet moth. But there are other moths that fly at night, and there are certain flowers that only open at night to get pollinated by moths. And moths play an important role in pollination. And of course, you get very interesting ones. Another day flying one looks quite similar, I suppose, to the one we've got here is a cinnabar moth, most recognizable by its yellow and black caterpillars that you'll see all over plants like ragwort and groundsel, because that's the two favored plants for them to eat. And then the other major pollinator, I mean, there are other accidental pollinators. A lot of flies pollinate. Also, a lot of the wasps pollinate. But beetles. A lot of people don't realize beetles are pollinators, but beetles were the first ever pollinators. Pollination basically came about, and the whole variety of flowers that we now get today was all as the result of accidental pollination carried out by beetles. Beetles existed long before all these other pollinators did, but you still today get pollen beetles, which play a role in pollination, and things like the thick-legged flower beetle, which also plays an important role in pollination. But why is pollination important? Well, 8 out of 10 of our wildflower species in the UK are dependent on pollination for reproduction. I like using the 8 out of 10 rather than the 80% because it reminds me of the old Whiskers adverts. But yeah, the point is it's crucial. Imagine how boring the countryside would be if we lost 8 out of all of the 10 species of wildflowers in our country. Fruit. Virtually every fruit that we grow is dependent on pollination. Now, if we lost all our pollinators, we either would lose all of these lovely fruits and vegetables, or we would have to carry out hand pollination. And it is estimated that if we paid people a minimum wage to carry out hand pollination in this country, it would put £2 billion per annum on the cost of fruit and vegetables. And we're worried about how inflation's hitting us at the moment. Imagine what that would do if we lost all of our pollinators. As I say, virtually all fruits, soft fruits and tree fruits are actually is the strawberry. You can get strawberries to self-pollinate. So we wouldn't be without strawberries. However, strawberries that are not pollinated by pollinators are on average much smaller and less tasty. The same is said of coffee. Don't grow it in the UK, but coffee is something that will self-pollinate, but again, it tastes better. On the other hand, they also say it tastes better after it's been eaten by some cat and excreted, which I've never tried and don't really fancy. And of course, where would we be without chocolate? And chocolate is pollinator dependent. And people often ask, what's the purpose of various different creatures? So I'll tell you, I'll lead into a little secret. Midges are what pollinates chocolate. They are the pollinator of the cocoa plant. Without midges, we would have no chocolate. So I think there is a role for the midge in the world. I can forgive the odd bite if we can have chocolate. So that's what they do. Why are pollinators in decline? Well, there's a raft of reasons. Loss of habitat is the #1 reason. And loss of habitat comes from various reasons. England's green and pleasant lands, it's actually gone after the green, but they tend to be just fields of wheat, fields of sugar beet. There's nothing else there. There's nothing there for a pollinator. Our urban landscapes have been built on, turned into decking, turned into areas of paving like this one here. So all that habitat is being lost. As well as losing habitat, you're getting fragmentation of habitat, which is it basically means you might have something that's really good for pollinators and other insects, and somewhere else that's really good, but the gap between the two is so great that if something happens at this great place, everything's basically going to die because it can't get anywhere. Poison I put here, basically it's the chemicals, and it's not just pesticides. Yeah, pesticides have a huge impact, and don't forget that, but herbicides also have a huge impact, because this is why this area is just wheat, because all the herbicides that are put in there that take out the flowers that would naturally be growing in there and providing food for pollinators. So it isn't just pesticides, it's herbicides as well. And of course, climate change is having an impact. I mentioned how it affects mayflies. Bumblebees are also very heavily affected by climate change. If you go down to the Mediterranean, there are 2 species of bumblebee. We have 25. France has 47 species of bumblebee. Bumblebees like a temperate climate. And what they're trying to do is to move northwards. And of course, this fragmentation of habitat means they can't. So the majority of our species of bumblebees have started to move northwards. Many of them are now only found in the cairngorms of Scotland and further north. Some of them have got trapped in the south, things like the shrill cardabee, the brown-banded cardabee. 20, 30 years ago, they were some of the most common bumblebees in the whole of England. You basically found them from sort of South Wales across to the Wash and everywhere south of there. They're now just found on a few isolated sites in the Thames Gateway. A few isolated sites are in the Cardiff area, Salisbury Plain, and a few sites in the Somerset Levels. From having been one of our most common species, they're incredibly under threat. And this has all been down to, well, loss of habitat, use of pesticides and other poisons, and this impact of climate change. They don't like it so warm. A good case in point is a couple of years ago, we did some surveys along with Radio 4 Today programme on bee activity over the sort of Christmas period. And you know, you think back, well, probably even 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen any bees out if you went out over Christmas. So we actually had bees active, recorded right in the north end of Scotland. Bumblebees were active, and we know from fact that there are at least 2 species of bumblebees that are now nesting over winter all around the country. And this is a real worry, because what normally happens with a bumblebee is the queen sets up in spring, and this is sort of time of year when you'll see them out, flying out, setting up their nests. You often see them flying low over the ground, even areas where there isn't any obvious flowers, and that's because they're looking for somewhere to make a nest, because the ideal nesting place for the majority of bumblebee species is a deserted mouse hole. And they fly low over the ground because they're sniffing for the smell of stale mouse urine to find somewhere to make their home. Now, the problem is they would do that, they have the nest, a number of new queens are formed, they go off, hibernate over winter, and the cycle begins all again the next year. If instead they're having to make a colony over winter, if you think about it, there aren't that many things around for pollinators in the winter. There's not many flowers. And although it's warm enough for them to be out and active, because this is a problem, once the temperature is above 5 degrees, it's impossible for bees to hibernate, and most other invertebrates. So they have to start being active. And if they aren't going out and getting food, they're burning off a lot more energy than when in hibernation mode. But of course, it's generally very wet and very windy now in our winters, which makes flying and going out and gathering food difficult. And of course, there's not very much food out there. So there's a real risk that we're going to see major colony collapse amongst things like bumblebees, and they could go into quite fast declines. So huge worries out there. Now, this isn't going to work.
We all see wildflowers as beautiful and great for our well-being, but for the thousands of pollinating insects that share this land with us, wildflowers are vital. But there's a problem. Pollinators are finding themselves in isolated oases, walled in by agricultural land, urban landscapes, roads and gardens. What humans see as neat and tidy, insects see as desert. Since 1940, we've lost 97% of our flower-rich meadows, and hundreds of our pollinator species are in decline. At Buglife, we have come up with a beautiful solution to the problem: beelines, a network of insect pathways along which we are restoring and creating wildflower-rich habitat. These insect superhighways will extend across the whole of the UK, allowing wildlife to move freely through our countryside and towns. But we need your help to make it happen. Restoring fields of wildflowers, making space for wildlife in our towns, on road verges, local parks or gardens. Mowing the lawn less often, it's the easiest thing you can do for your local pollinators. Or how about planting a wildflower meadow in your local park or school? Then add your project to the Beelines map. Help us make our network of habitats bigger, better and more joined up. Find out more at buglife.org.uk. Saving the small things that run the planet.
So hopefully the sound came through with that. Yes, brilliant. I just think that that little animation explains what beelines is all about far better than I could tell you in such a short time period. Beelines is, because we've had a lot of doom and gloom so far, but we're now going to talk about solutions and how we can make things better, and beelines is one of those solutions. And there's a lot of science into the beelines. What we've done is we've looked at data to find out which places are good for pollinators, and we plot them on a map, and then it's usually done on a county by county basis. We've got local groups of wildlife enthusiasts, local wildlife trusts around a table, and we sort of said, look, this is what the data says, what do you think? And they might say, well, unfortunately, that site's no longer there, or there's also this place that's really good. We've then taken it away, and we've tried to put some lines of best fit to join those habitats up together. And then obviously they get tweaked at county boundaries so that each county flows into the next county. And the idea is to put connectivity back in there. And that's what we call it insect superhighways. But of course, You think, well, you're never going to do that because you're thinking about roads. And if I build a road, the moment my road ends, unless you've got caterpillar tracks or possibly a really good 4x4, your vehicle has to stop. It can't go any further. Well, these insect superhighways can be thought of more as stepping stones. And if you can fill in 10% of a beeline with these stepping stones, it will start to function. The more you fill it in, the better it will function. But once you've started to fill it in, it will make a difference. And the reason for plotting the beelines is that if you do things this way, you'll get that connectivity there so much quicker than if we just randomly put patches in for pollinators. I'm not saying it's wrong to, it's really good. And anyone that does it, pat on the back, it's great to do it. But if you do it in the beeline, it will have a real impact. Because if we just randomly put in patches for pollinators around the country, you'd need at least 10 times the area that you do this way. And one thing I take issue with in the video is it tells us that we lost 97% of our flower rich meadows. Okay, it's a big number, but that's all it means, isn't it? Let's put it in perspective. We've lost an area equivalent to 1.5 times the size of Wales. That's how much flower rich meadowland we have lost since the basically start of the Second World War. So it is a massive, massive area that we've lost due to all these different changes and pressures on the land. But beelines is a real alternative. It's a real solution to this as a problem. It's something that we've been working on for probably over 10 years now. We came up with the theory and then we trialed it. We did some work up in Rydale in Yorkshire. We created a section of beeline and we measured to make sure connectivity worked and to make sure it was improving. And we're now carrying out projects all around the country, but we're also working with other organisations. So for instance, the Cumbria Wildlife Trust are doing a big beelines project in Cumbria. And getting others to sort of, deliver on this work, and some fantastic results have come in. And I mentioned the shrill carderby earlier, but we did some work in Cardiff, and shrill cardarbys have now been seen in Cardiff town centre, and that can only be put down to the fact that these corridors have started to work. So there are real solutions that can be made, and of course we can all take part in these solutions ourselves. There are things we can do in our gardens. There are even things we can do if we don't have a garden. If you live in a flat, if you've got a balcony, or you can even just put a window box in. And I always say to people, if that's all you've got, a window box in the flat. Yeah, wildflowers are brilliant. They're really good for pollinators, but think about herbs, because if you let your herbs go to flower, they're also all brilliant for pollinators. And of course, you can then pick them and you can put them in your food. And it's a way of just making life that bit more fun for you if you haven't got a garden. But if you've got a garden, there's all sorts of things you can do there. And the other thing to bear in mind is, as I said, climate change means that a lot of our invertebrates are now active for a much longer period than they normally are, and a period when our native flowers aren't always around. So you do have to think about other things that might be useful. So for instance, something like Viburnum tinus is a great overwinter flower that's accessible to pollinators. Winter jasmine is another one, both non-native species, but both accessible for our pollinators over the winter period. Ivy is a very important source of pollen and nectar late season, probably from September through to November at least. It's very, very important, to the extent that there is actually the ivy bee, which is one of the mining bees, which basically thrives on ivy, and it tends to come out in that sort of September time period. It looks very like a wasp, but it is black and yellow striped, and a lot of people think they're wasps, and we often get calls from people saying, we've got lots of wasps nesting in our garden, and they're actually ivy mining bees, because they're ground nesting bees who've made these little nests in the ground there. So what sort of things can you do? Compost heaps, brilliant for bugs, compost worms and wood lice and centipedes which hunt down slugs. There's all sorts of things that you'll get in your compost heap that are, really, really useful. A water butt. Why have I put a water butt there? Because it's saving on the extraction of water, and the extraction of water is having a really negative impact on a lot of invertebrates. In the same way, it's not listed on here because it's not something you can see, but something you should do is avoid using peat-based products. Again, you know, I mean, there's obviously the impact on the climate of peat, but there is also a huge number of invertebrates that are dependent on these peat habitats, and we actually do a lot of work in Scotland on peat bog restoration. We've restored over 100 hectares of peat bog in the last 3 years, and an ongoing project that's still working up there doing it. And peat bog restoration is quite an interesting thing, because basically you're damming off drainage ditches so that they re-flood, and until they do that, they are actually pouring carbon into the atmosphere, but once you've got them set up, they're a great carbon sink. So it's really good, as well as making great habitat. Have some wild areas in your garden. Most of the common butterflies that we love to see in our garden, in fact all but one of the common species, require stinging nettles as the food plant for where they lay their eggs. Now, most people don't like stinging nettles, and you probably don't like them in the garden, particularly if you've got kids. But if you can have some, you have got a great food plant there for butterflies. Of course, nettles spread, as anyone who gardens knows. So you can consider treating it a bit like you treat mint. Grow it in a bucket so it can't spread, but you've got it there, because you can also make quite decent wine and quite nice soup from nettles. So it has got a practical purpose as well. Climbing plants, particularly ivies, are really useful. Sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Climbing plants, particularly ivies, are really useful to have. Some of our trees, I mean, all trees are really, really useful. Oak trees host a lot of things, but there are smaller trees that work in gardens that are very good. Things like a rowan tree, it's quite small growing, but it has flowers that are accessible to pollinators. Flowering shrubs, think about native hedgerow. Early in the year, one of the first flowers that comes out is blackthorn, and you'll see blackthorn is a great magnet for the queen bumblebees, because it's one of the first sources of food for them when they're trying to establish colonies. It's also a very good barrier because people don't like going through it. Let your grass grow long and let some flowers grow in it, so that it encourages pollinators and others to use it. If you've got the space, have a bog garden. If you've got the space and your children are old enough to not have to worry about them, have a pond as well. A lot of people don't realize, but invertebrates do need to drink as well. They don't just pop into flowers. And solitary bees, most of them tend to seal things up using mud, so they actually need water as part of that process. They also need some bare earth in order to get things. Stone piles are great. There's lots of invertebrates that like to shelter it, particularly during the heat of the day, under nice stone piles and a bit of damp there. I've mentioned herbs. Herbs are brilliant for pollinators, as long as you let them flower. You do have to let them flower. Pollinator-friendly flower beds. Yes, we talked about wildflowers and wild areas. There are plenty of other flowers that are great for pollinators. Bear in mind, most of the garden flowers we have were derived from wildflowers. The thing to do is to go for simple flower structures. These really pretty but multiple headed flowers where all the petals pile in one another, they don't have accessibility for pollinators. So single type flowers are really good. Have a little mini meadow in your garden. Deadwood. Deadwood is brilliant, particularly for things like beetles. Most of the beetles and then their larvae, they love those sort of habitats. And you'll get different ones if you have a log pile in a sort of sunny, dry area to a log pile in a damp area. And let's think about bug hotels. Bug hotels are great as well. And bug hotels come in all different shapes and sizes. You can make some fantastic bug hotels, stacking old pallets up and stuffing them full of all kinds of material, branches. Something that's really good actually is moss. You can pile a load of moss in, because that's what queen bumblebees generally go into to hibernate over winter. They like to make themselves a den out of moss. Here's a very fancy one that someone built. This is a more typical self-made one. This one's using bamboo canes. In actual fact, dried river reeds are really, really good as a source for that. You need to cut them down into about 10 centimetre lengths. You can just tie them together in a bundle, key thing is about positioning. So if you're looking for solitary bees, as south facing or as near south facing as possible is how you need to go. Corrugated cardboard, rolled up, stuffed into an old bottle and hung up, provides perfect habitat for things like lacewings and ladybirds to overwinter. Logs with holes drilled in them, again, for most UK solitary bees and things, you're looking at a diameter for your hole of between 4 and 10 millimeters. They're very, very small holes. A lot of the stuff you'll see on sale, particularly in some of the supermarkets and that, they use these bamboo canes with these great massive holes. And I'm not going to say they don't work, because they do, because I've seen them work, but they are not as good as if you get the holes to the right sizes. That's far, far better. Here we are, it's a pile of old leaves and things that have just been gathered up. It provides overwinter shelter. And here's an example of a very creative bee home that was made in the shape of the Millennium Falcon when we had a competition on making bug homes. The point is, you can make them or you can buy them. If you make them, make sure you make them to the right standards, and we have information on our website about that. If you buy them, make sure that they meet the standards. Don't just buy some cheap stuff that's been made in, most of it's been made in China, and a lot of it's been covered in wood preservative, and things are not deep enough. As I say, it needs to be 10 centimeters deep. That's so things can survive over winter when the frost hits. And it needs to be south facing, whereas bird boxes you tend to put up more sort of northwesterly facing because they don't like it too hot. Like bats, you want them as south facing or as south facing as possible. But unlike bats, which you want to put ideally at sort of 4 to 5 meters high, you're looking here for bug homes 1 to 1.5 meters above sort of ground level for solitary bees. So we can all do that. We can make our own, we can buy bug homes, we can make shelter, we can do stuff in our gardens, on our balconies, on our window boxes. You can even put, say, if you've got a flat, you can put a solitary bee home on the side. And people say, well, how do things get up there? Well, the thing is they do. We created some, what we call living roofs on a flat area on top of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And we went back to do a survey of it. We created 2 separate ones. We created what we called a dry roof garden and a wet roof garden, which we had a pond with it. And we found up there quite a few invertebrates that can't even fly. So they must have hitched a lift on a bird or something, and they'd started colonies up there, and they were starting to thrive up there. Things will find a way up to the top of the highest buildings. They will get there. I want to now talk about Allen and the problem with Allen. Light pollution, artificial light at night. Sorry if there's anyone called Allen on the call. Light pollution is probably the most acceptable form of pollution we still have. People get really worried about chemical pollution and industrial pollution. We don't tend to get so worked up about light pollution, but light pollution is having a major impact. It is reckoned that 1 in every 3 invertebrates that encounters light pollution, it dies as a result of it. Some of them because they bash into things, some of them because they get too hot and burn up on hot filaments, and then the rest of them because they just become easy prey to predators such as bats as a result of light pollution. And we can all do something about light pollution. It's as simple as, oh, it's dark outside, let's draw the curtains if we have lights on inside. And it's things like, we have outside lights, let's put them on a switch so that we can turn them off so that they're not on all the time. And I mean, one of the really sad things here is, and a lot of people have probably invested in outdoor solar lights because it sounds really good, we're not using electricity. But if they haven't got a switch on, they're on all the time, and you're creating that light pollution. And yes, I'm here to talk about invertebrates, but light pollution also has a very negative impact on birds and obviously bats. So, it isn't just the invertebrates that are affected. And of course, here we have the glowworm. It's a sort of highlighted species. I mean, moths, you've seen how moths come to light. They're hugely impacted, but the glowworm, the glowworm has to glow like that to attract a mate. If there's lots of light around, it's very difficult for them to find a mate. and it's having a very detrimental effect on glowworms, and they are just such a beautiful species of beetle. Why they're called worms, I don't know. But, you know, they are such a fantastic beetle, and you know, when they're lit up like that, it's a beautiful sight. It's, you know, if you've ever been overseas and seen fireflies, that's another really exciting sight. Again, even if we had them in this country, you wouldn't see them in most places because, well, this is the UK at night, and you can see all those bright areas of light. You know, here's London, yeah, but you've got Liverpool and Manchester, and that's probably Birmingham and Leeds and Bradford, and you know, the country is just aglow. There are very few of these dark areas left, which are so important for invertebrates. And I say, yeah, moths. I mean, a small amount of light, if you want to observe something, that's fine. It's about having it on all the time is what we're talking about. And one great activity you can do is to do a bit of moth trapping. And yeah, there's all sorts of expensive kit you can buy for it. And I see you've got some moth trapping on, but if you hang a white sheet on the washing line, spread it out a bit and put a glowing torch in the middle of it, you'll get a whole load of moths just land on that sheet, and you can have a look at that in your own garden, in your own space, and just have a look at your moths. And they are absolutely fascinating. I mean, I really love the hawk moths. They are just, yes, such fabulous large moths. You can get involved in doing surveys as well. Surveys are really important, and there's two I want to highlight here. The pollinator monitoring FIT counts. It's a fixed in time is what the FIT stands for, and this leads into the National Pollinator Monitoring Scheme. They sound really complex, but they are actually quite simple. You basically choose a 50 centimetre square. This one's been quite professionally done, but basically you can knot bits of string together to make your square. You lay your square out over an area, and then you choose one type of flower in it. So if you know much, you say, oh, look, there's dandelions in here, so I'm choosing dandelions. But you can just say, I'm going to pick the yellow flowers. That still works. And what you do is you just spend 10 minutes observing this square that you've done, and you just tick off what visits the flowers during that time period. And if you don't know much, it's just flying insect. But if you can tell things apart, it's hoverfly, solitary bee, bumblebee. So it's something that I've done it with primary school children before, and they get the hang of it and get on quite well with it. But it also, I think it does start to encourage people to start thinking, I want to be able to identify things. So I'd really encourage people to do that. There aren't enough people doing this yet. It's 10 minutes of your time, and it's now available as an app on your phone. In the old days, you used to have to print off, well, I say old days, a couple of years ago, you had to print off a piece of paper and then go back home and then basically data enter it all on a computer onto a website. You can now just do it all on your phone, which is really great. And they also have some handy tips on the app as to how to identify the difference between the different species types. Another great phone app that's available is Bugs Matter. This is one that Buglife actually run in conjunction with Kent Wildlife Trust. Now, many of you will have heard of the old concept of the windscreen splatter, and will remember in the past when you drove somewhere and how often the car used to have to be stopped and the windscreen wiped down because there were so many things splattered on it, and how it doesn't happen anymore. So this is a scientific way of looking at it. And I say this is now also an app on the phone, and we're looking at number plates, not windscreens. And there's a reason for that. If you think about it, windscreens are at all different angles and shapes. Number plates are all the same size, and they're all in a vertical plane. So it doesn't matter what you're driving, you should get a fairly similar effect on it. There was a survey done by the RSPB in 2004 where they did this. Back then, it wasn't an app. People went out and they manually counted it, and they put little splatometer grids up there. But that's a baseline survey. Last year is the first year that the survey has been repeated on a nationwide basis, 2021. So say it's now an app. We're working further on the app to the point where hopefully this splatometer won't be needed. And also, you may not even need to count the bug splats yourself, or even clean your number plate before you start. If you take a picture before and after, we're working with artificial intelligence that will be able to do the count for you. But the results from 2021, and these are not in the public domain yet, because we're still just finalising it and preparing it to put it in the public domain, but they are alarming or even horrific. We are looking at over 60% drop in the number of flying insects since 2004. In 18 years, we have seen that level of decline in flying insects in the UK. Scotland's not quite as bad. Scotland's only in the sort of early 30%. And I'm not saying that's good, but you know, England and Wales are in a far worse state. It's a really horrific and really worrying fact that this is what's happening. But we would encourage more people to take part, because the more data we have, the better we can see how things are going. And it's not just about a long journey. It's not driving Land's End to John O'Groats. It's doing the school run. It's driving to work. Because if we have journeys that are only within a certain area, we can actually start to produce statistics for individual areas. So we have actually produced statistics for England, for Scotland and Wales. Some of the regions we are able to look at. It would be good to be able to start to look at county level. Unfortunately, there haven't been enough results from Northern Ireland. I think we had 80 something, and you need at least 100 in an area to be able to get a statistically viable result for what's going on. But these are all surveys that people can get involved with and can do. So I'm now going to stop sharing, because that's the end of my slideshow, and hopefully that wasn't too boring as slideshows go. I hate ones that are full of lots of words and stuff like that.
That was amazing. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, open the floor up to questions. Now I have had a few in advance, which I will answer later on, but let's see what else we've got in the way of questions.
Sean, have you seen any?
Sorry, I'll just unmute myself. I haven't had anything come through on the chat, so I don't know whether there aren't a huge amount of people to manage. So I don't know whether if somebody wants to just wave and I can unmute them and we can manage questions that way. I haven't seen anything come through on the chat rooms unless someone's just posted something in chat. No, no one's doing that.
So I could start by answering. I have been sent a few in advance.
Oh, yes.
Now, to answer the first one, excuse the mess that's my house. We haven't been here very long, which is why I've been using the virtual background. I just need to remove my virtual background, because it'll work better if I do. If I can remember how to do it. Yeah, that's it, I think. No, not that one. Virtual backgrounds. It's there. There we are. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a building site. So one of the questions I was asked was, you know, if I could recommend one book, what would it be for different age groups? So I've got to start with, this is why I unmuted it. Here we are, Bugs Save the World. This is a great book for young people who are interested in it. It's only recently come out into the shops. It is written by Buglife and beautiful illustrations throughout as well, and it's got lots of fun facts about bugs and the wonderful things they do for us, including some of the bugs that eat polystyrene and digest it and destroy it. So this is all why bugs are so important to us on the planet. Worms are in there. So just lots of really useful facts and some beautiful illustrations. I am slightly biased because I did do the writing part of it, but no, it is a really good book. If you're looking for something for people who are, you know, older children or more amateur people, this is another book. I'm not sure if this one is out yet that's come through, but it's called Gardening Insects of Britain. Literally, it's just come through for review. So it's possibly not in the shops yet, but it's got most of the things you'd find in your garden, nice big color plate, a lot of information about them, a couple of 100 species there. So it's a really good sort of beginner's starter thing. And then, I mean, personally, I love Collins guides, and I think they're a really good thing because they fit in your pocket. But I think this is a great one. British Insects, won't fit in your pocket, massive great tome. But if you want something that's going to cover most insects, it's really good. It hasn't got every species in it, obviously, but it has got all of the ones you're likely to find, and one or two of the really rare ones you'll find in here as well. Obviously, this only covers insects. Once you get into this sort of level, you don't tend to get a book that covers all bugs, unfortunately. But that was one of the questions I was asked. I see we now have a hand up.
Yes, Jean. Yeah.
I just wondered about the age groups for those books. I'm thinking of a child who's about 6 or 7. Would it be the first one you held up?
I think yes, 6 or 7. I would go with a book like that. It's good large writing, no too complicated words, and it's got great stuff like poo eaters and things, which I think goes down really well that sort of age group.
Yeah, sure, like that. Thank you.
It's published by Wayland, I think. It says Wayland on it, yeah. And it
Brilliant.
retails at £12.99. Just looking at the back of it. Again, I'm not sure if that's out yet or whether I've just had the advanced copy come through, but it will be out very, very soon if it isn't out.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more any questions for Paul?
So I've also been asked about the my top 10 bugs in the garden.
Right.
So
I'm sorry, I think Gina
Sorry.
question. Gina.
Oh yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I've just unmuted.
Yes.
The Beelines project. Paul, how do you contribute to that, you know, locally? I mean, is it that we find a beeline near us, somewhere that's on that map, and try to plant something there, or get involved with people who are doing, or is it that are you kind of organising that bug life kind of top down with local authorities and things like that?
It's both. Yeah, it
Okay.
is both. So if you live on or near a beeline, or know people who live on or near a beeline, if you can encourage them to do things. I mean, I actually, my house is on a beeline, and my previous house was on a beeline. So I do bits and pieces in my garden, for the benefit of bees. And then you can load that up yourself. If you go onto the website, you can upload what you've done, including photos if you wish, onto the map to show what you've done. So that's how an individual can contribute in their own area. But if you can also get a community group to do something, that's brilliant. The other thing is I've now got a partnership with an organization that's going out and persuading various companies to put money into pollinators. So if you've got a project of a larger scale you'd like doing, do get in touch, because I might have a pot of money that would cover buying seeds to do a few acres type of project in your vicinity. So yeah, if you've got an area in mind of a large area, do get in touch. I may well have a little pocket of money available to at least get you the seeds, and possibly even to get you some volunteers to come in and help with doing any sort of planting work. And again, we've got plenty of information on how to do it. That's not to say if you don't live on a beeline not to do stuff, because it's still very, very important. And if you think of the beelines as the motorways, we also need A roads and B roads, and we used to have C roads. I don't think we do anymore, do we? Just have unclassified. But
I have a question just following on from Gina. Where can we find out where our beelines are?
So if you go on our website, and there's a drop down called Our Work, and then under that there is a title called Beelines, and if you go to that, there is a map, and then you can just zoom into the map. We are actually working to have that improved, because at the moment it doesn't like pop out really, really large to you. Actually, let me just share my screen and I'll take you there. So this is the Buglife website. Scroll on the top, Our Work, Beelines. Right, on this page, if you scroll down it, this is the map. And then you can zoom into it. And you can start to see where things are. And all these little dots you can start to see appearing are where people have uploaded things onto it. So,
okay.
And if I click on that, here's someone who's done, and there's a picture of what they've done. Yeah, so that's just an individual. There will be stuff that we've done as well that goes on there, and stuff that other organisations have done. My geography of your part of the world's not brilliant, but you're somewhere, where are you? Somewhere in this area, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Let's have a look.
We're just to the east of Bath. You can see Bath, near Bradford on Avon.
Oh, you're there, aren't you? Yeah. You're not quite on the beeline, unfortunately.
Oh, but so Limpley Stoke look as though they are, which is a bit more west, so we could work with those as well.
Yeah, I mean, it runs very close by. The other thing is that we consider anything within 500 meters of the edge of the line as being within the beeline. So, yeah, the beelines themselves are 3 kilometers wide, but then you've got another half a kilometer either side, which would get very close to you, I would imagine. So I'll stop that share again. It's easier to see you without sharing it.
Can I ask you a question, Paul? Are parish councils under any obligation to help wildlife in any way? So I think they've changed some of the lights to LED lights, and we've got a nature reserve, but do they have any obligation? Do you know?
There's been a lot of pressure on councils at all levels to start bringing in strategies to support nature, and there's a lot who've now adopted pollinator strategies, and there are some model pollinator strategies available for councils as a download off of our website, in fact, and a lot are now starting to adopt a pollinator strategy. You've raised an interesting issue there, though, LED lights, and going back to this artificial light at night. Now, LED lights are brilliant as energy savers. However, they are actually often much brighter than the lights they've replaced. Also, they are a much whiter light. If you remember the old sodium lights, which is what a lot of them have replaced, were more of a yellow. Now, things towards the yellow-red end of the spectrum generally don't impact as much as the white light does on invertebrates. There are some that it still impacts quite badly on at the yellow-red end of the spectrum, but in general, it has less impact at that end of the spectrum as it does when it's white light. So modern lighting is more of a problem. But we're actually doing some quite exciting work with Network Rail. We're a little team of them working, and we're looking to get some into their regulations going forward, where we're looking at, now obviously they need lighting. They need lighting for people to feel safe, but we're looking at different things they can do to reduce the impact of their lighting. Some of it's about making it much more directional, with sort of shading on it so it doesn't spread out everywhere, which so much lighting does. Some of it's about putting things on timers or motion sensors. But yeah, some huge progress there. And if we can make that work, we've got a really strong case study to roll out to other places. So that's quite exciting. We do a lot of that. We've done some work on living walls as well. And we've developed what we call the vertical meadow. With a small company that just started up, and again, anyone who's encountered living walls will have thought there's an awful lot of plastic in them, because most of them got plastic pots, and if they're not made out of plastic, then they tend to be made from hessian, and of course, post Grenfell, there's a lot of worry around that. No matter about the plastic use, they're very flammable, particularly if the wall dries out. So we've actually worked with this company, and the living wall that's been developed, the substrate is rock wool. Rock wool doesn't burn, but it holds water, so it makes a really good substrate. And the exterior part of it is made of aluminium with little holes perforated in it, which is what the plants go out through. So again, aluminium doesn't burn until temperatures get really high. So you've no longer got a fire hazard when you've got this sort of cladding. And we've actually developed it so that it's a full-blown meadow, but instead of growing on the flat, it's growing on the vertical. And we've been monitoring that and developing it and making some tweaks to it. And then hopefully it will be available as a to-market product. And also with that, we've also developed a lot of sites, when they're doing development and stuff, they put cladding around it, hoardings and so forth. We've made a sort of portable vertical meadow as a form of hoarding as well that can be used on sites. So at least you're getting some sort of benefit when things like that are being done.
Fantastic. Have we got any more questions, Sean? I think it's
not that I can see. No.
It is 8:15, so I think we'll end there. But thank you so much for your fact-packed talk. I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing and the time that you spent with us to give us some ideas about how we can try and improve our area here for pollinators. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me in, and thank you for all of your enthusiasm to get involved and to do things for invertebrates and for wildlife in general, because it's so important that we do things. And it's not a hopeless situation. We can turn it around. Lots of small steps together add up to one big step, and that's what we can do if we all work together. So thank you for inviting me along and for all the good work I'm sure you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Okay, bye.